You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. My name is Shawn Wilkie, and along with my awesome co-host, we interview the innovators in this space every week. Ivan, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Hi, I'm Ivan Zach, and I'm happy to introduce Catherine Haskins. We're going to talk about building a community of veterinarians. Catherine is a co-founder at the Bridge Club. She's also a founder of the Haskins Consulting. She holds a bachelor degree in public relations and journalism from the University of Northern Iowa. She also authored a children's book, Nicknames, and all the proceeds from that book goes to charity that rehabs the children's playgrounds. We want to start maybe with tell us a little bit about that little book that you wrote.
So I wrote a book called Nicknames, and it was for my young daughter when she was very, very young. And what we found is that all parents tend to use the exact same nickname at some point with their child. And so this book takes you on the journey of the various nicknames we give our children and what they also call us and what those meanings mean. And then ultimately, the bottom line is we all end up having the exact same nickname that we give each other. So it's a fun little book. My very, very good friend illustrated this. It is, in fact, me and my husband and my daughter in the book. It's fun to see yourself in a caricature. So it's a fantastic book. And again, all the proceeds go to rehabbing playgrounds and putting them into underserved markets.
Awesome. Sounds like we should be careful with the nicknames to our children. So I have a newborn daughter. She's 2 months old, and I call her Grandpa because she has hair almost like mine, but she has a little bit more in the back. So
Oh
my
my
wife is not
gosh.
happy about it, but I always say it's a grumpy because she always cries, so it's a grumpy grandpa. So anyway, hopefully nobody hears
No,
that.
she'll love it later in life. Later in life, that'll be a story to share.
That's the best thing about podcasting, Ivan. Now we've got a digital record of you calling your daughter Grandpa. This is awesome.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
hopefully
great.
she'll never find out. So, Bridge Club. Some people say that it's a combination of TED Talk, LinkedIn, and the book club. So, being primarily video focused, were there any challenges to building this community? And tell us more about it. How did you build it? What inspired you? Where did it start?
So the Bridge Club, let me start at the beginning of like how it initially started. So the Bridge Club actually started as a very casual networking event within the veterinary profession at conferences. We've all been to conferences where our schedules are so full, we never get to see the people we really want to see, the people that we want to spend the quality time with. And we're always running around going, maybe I'll see you at the bar later. Let's connect. And it just never happens. So my co-founder, Brenda Andreessen, also saw that. And what she did was she rented out a bar and she called all the people that she thought were wickedly cool. Happy to say I was one of the first and brought us all together. We didn't know one another, and it was an opportunity to really engage with one another. And this went on for about, 8 years or so. At every conference, we would get together. But then, as happens with many things, the world starts to change and people's schedules pull them in different directions. And so it had a death, if you will. It died. But then about 4 years ago, she and I were batting around ideas, and we said we should do something with what we had then called the Bridge Club. And it was called the Bridge Club for a funny reason back then. It was called that because we all had administrative assistants. It's funny how time has changed so much that most of us don't have those anymore. But we had administrative assistants, and those folks would see something on our calendars and would try to move it. And with it being called the Bridge Club, they would go, "Ooh, I don't know what that is. I'm not sure if I can move that off of someone's schedule. It doesn't seem like I know who's in charge of that to move it." So that was the primary reason. But her mother played bridge. So she thought that's a cute little name and we'll call it that. It's evolved over time since then as to why we kept the name Bridge Club. But we felt there was a real need and desire for this profession to connect and engage on a different level. We know that most people use their cell phones to text message, and we have become a society where we talk at one another instead of talking with. Thank goodness for the advent of podcasts. It gives us the opportunity to have conversations. But with time as it's moving faster and faster, we just see that text messages are the fastest way. And we know that depending on what study you look at, About 90% of all communications is lost because 90% of it is nonverbal. So if you're having a conversation and you're missing my hand gestures, you're missing the look on my face, or if someone like myself, I have a very deep voice. So therefore, I can sound very authoritarian at times when I'm actually trying to be very comforting. So if you don't see those other pieces of who I am, you miss it. So it's very important for us to find a way to take what the Bridge Club originally created, evolve it into a modern day where we could expand it to the entire profession and give us access to those nonverbals. Our biggest challenge pre-COVID was getting people to turn on their cameras. We found that the, millennials and the baby boomers were the first to turn their cameras on. Ironically enough, it was the Gen Xers who did not want to turn on their cameras. They felt like, well, no, I've got to be put together. I've got to make sure I look good. And we're still facing that a bit today, where they don't want to turn it on, especially during COVID. People go, listen, I'm in my sweats. But one of the greatest things to come out of COVID, one of the greatest things, is that people now realize we're human, and therefore they're turning on their cameras. And so people realize, catch me as I am. I'm going to have kids come in. I'm going to have dogs barking. And that's now okay in this world. And we've always said at the Bridge Club, we're people first and we're professionals second. So I don't care if we're on a Bridge Club and someone comes and asks for the keys of the car or whatever happens. This is a place you can gather and really network.
That's awesome. And to that note, as you were talking about, my son walked in and gave me something. So it's
I
just
love that. I love
perfect
that.
timing. But yeah, so, well, that's wonderful. There's, I wish sometimes I didn't see Shawn with gestures he shows during the podcast. But other than that, I think it's brilliant. So I have a question. You said about, we did it almost for 8 years, then it died out. 4 years ago, we started. How did you get into veterinary medicine and to the veterinary community?
So I have been fortunate. I have now been in the veterinary profession for about 20 years. And I've always been, which great, partnerships bring you from different areas of where you come from. My background is I've always been in the hip pocket of the C-suite and helping address emerging issues. So my background is in public relations, and so I've always done issues management, and I was very, very fortunate early in my career to get aligned in animal health and to be able to work at the C-suite level, to be able to help organizations navigate different issues. So I've been in the profession for a very, very long time, and I absolutely adore this profession. I like, when the not just companion, I love working in equine. I love poultry. I love, swine. I love it all because there's nothing like animal health. I'm very fortunate. I do work a little bit on human health, and to see that bridge that carries over is fantastic. But it started in veterinary medicine as a result of both where Brenda and I had been developing our careers.
So I've got a question for you. Catherine, we met. I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, it was Cindy at Shepherd that introduced us. So
Yes.
shout out to Cindy. She's yet to be on our show. We've got to have her on. She's great. But after we got introduced, it was just like, one of these relationships, like it was just, we hit it off immediately and we're throwing energy back and forth and asking questions and all of these kind of things that happened. And so one of the questions now that I have you on that I'd love to ask is, what do you think happens to our trade shows that we've got so accustomed to going to? Now that we're in this COVID world, things are supposedly going back to normal. I mean, the reason I'm asking you is because you're interacting with so many people in the profession. Are people, do you think, going to be open to going back and jumping on a plane and traveling across the country? How quickly do you think we're going to return back to normal?
So the first opportunity is going to be happening with AHA. And so they are actually going to have their Connect City. They're going to have it in Denver. And what they did was they actually surveyed their people. And I give this as a backstory for where I'm going. And so they actually surveyed all their members. And I guess it was almost a 50-50 split. I want to go, I want to have it online. And we've been talking about it at the Bridge Club a lot. So depending on where you are in the world, if you are in the professional support of the industry, Many of us are jonesing to get back on an airplane and get back to what we're used to doing. For the profession, what they're realizing is they finally, for the first time, have access at a much more reasonable cost to attend conferences and get their CE that they desperately want, or have access to CE that they didn't have. So, what I see happening is I think that moving forward, it is definitely going to be a combination of both. I work with the newly formed Virtual Care Association, Veterinary Virtual Care Association, and we will be hosting our very first virtual care summit as well. I think that the numbers are going to be outstanding. I think the numbers are going to reflect that people love the idea that, for lack of a better term, you get to sit in the chair you want instead of sitting in one of those conference chairs and have your back hurt. And it allows us to really change the dynamic of how we're going to engage with people. But I do believe in my heart of hearts, in person is still going to take place. We're going to have new restrictions on how that happens, but there will be a day, probably 2021, where I can hug and shake people's hands freely once again. And I look forward to that. I will just declare that I did hug someone the other day, and I almost brought tears in my eyes because I hadn't hugged anyone other than my family. So I think we as human beings need that. I think we need to have that connectivity, and we'll just figure out how to work within our new world to make all that happen.
Amen. I have a question about the tribe. One of my favorite authors, Seth Godin, he's talking about forming the tribe as a part of your sort of agenda, or people form them sometimes without knowing that they're doing that. But then once you form the tribe, people are following you. So it's been one of those passions that I had around, there was a product that I built, SmartFlow. There was, certain association with that, the workflow, and passionate about it, workflow improvements. You could be, as he talks about, it could be a red hat ladies club. It could be, in the veterinary profession, we see anesthesia nerds. It's all the folks that are passionate about anesthesia. That girl, I mean, she has massive following, which actually I didn't like the name, because when she started, when Matt, I just started SmartFlow, she started That Girl. I gave her criticism on that wrong, and I'm happy to see how Justine is succeeding and what she's doing. So what is the tribe like behind the Bridge Club? What is your tribe? And what are the characteristics, if you will?
So the number one characteristic of the Bridge Club is that you want to be a part of a conversation. You want your voice to be heard. We have no criteria whether you have to be this position or this is the role you have to play within the profession. It is anyone who touches veterinary medicine. So if you are a technician, a practice manager, you're a practice owner, you run a company, anything that touches veterinary medicine, we encourage you to come in. And the challenge becomes is, are you a sideline viewer or are you actively engaged in the game? We want the people who are in the game. And so what we love so much is that they are becoming very loyal followers. We decided to host just arbitrarily a happy hour, and we called it the Quarantini Happy Hour the minute this all started. And do you know that loyally every Friday we have people gathering together and there is no agenda? Because I feel like more than ever before, we've lost our connectivity of being able to network. And that's probably the biggest damage that's come out of all of this, is that we've been working in our own little shells of moving things forward, and people are desperate to find a way to have their voice heard within the profession. So that's who we are. If you want to be a part of the conversation, then come on in.
It's so awesome. And I'm attending my first this week, so I'm pretty excited. I got an invite, Ivan. I was going to share it with you, but didn't get around to it yet. So you should maybe come as well. It'll be at 3:00 in the morning your time.
But we are making a drink this time. This is, we had it happen just organically last week. One of the Bridger's husband was making her drink for her live while we were in there. And so he has agreed to be our bartender. And so we have sent out the recipe for everyone to make. And that's exactly what the Bridge Club is all about. We start and end every Bridge Club with a toast. And so we have focused these meetings and every other conversation that we have on really celebrating and understanding, and then listening and engaging with one another. So that's the important part. So the bartender does play a really important role in what we do.
So, Catherine, the innovation behind where you've taken the Bridge Club. So you started at these in-person conference events. Now you're doing Zoom calls. And what direction? So, I mean, I get the framework, But what's your desire? Where does the Bridge Club exist in 10 years? What does it look like in the future? Where are you going?
So, well, we just launched our newest arm. So it's called Bridge Club Pets. And I will tell you, we are going directly to the pet owner. So, what we know is that 60% of all pet owners check out Dr. Google first, or they're going to a Facebook group before they're actually talking to their veterinarian. As telemedicine is evolved, people are still in a crisis mode whenever they're having a conversation with their veterinarian or any of the healthcare team. So we want to remove that crisis and we want to make it so that you can actually have a conversation with a veterinary professional. So we launched the Bridge Club Pets and it is based on the same concept but modified. And what this allows is in the chat of what we do, there are always certified, registered, or licensed veterinary technicians or DVMs in the chat for pet owners to get real insight about their pet. We are always driving them back to their veterinarian, but the purpose here is to now give the profession an opportunity to talk to pet owners when they're not in crisis. So that's the first stage of where we're going. And then our intention here is to continue to elevate that even further. We want to elevate the profession as a whole. And right now, because everyone's always dealing with growing their membership, or people are too busy launching a product, or we're trying to deal with revenue issues, we are not dealing with the profession as a whole and the authority that they have. So we want to lift them up and really give the pet owner resources where they understand that that information that they're getting should come from a healthcare provider. It should not be coming from someone who is a self-proclaimed, I know this dog better than anybody else.
This is so cool. And I love how, with the flexibility of podcasting, we can just do whatever we want. So, Ivan, let me connect you with Catherine about your study that you're doing. And why don't you guys talk about that just for a quick second right during this podcast?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, Shawn. So I'm hoping that this will help this, but it is also helping the profession. We all know about the burnout and everything that's happening, and an increasing rate of suicide. A lot of people talk about it. So I dedicated my MBA dissertation thesis to finding a methodology or comparing some sort of business methodologies from the human healthcare, and researched a lot of lean methodologies applied. And I'm doing a research on quantifying the degree of burnout among a profession. And it's also not exclusive to veterinarians only. It's anybody who is a technician, the practice manager, the assistant, reception, or customer success manager. So the survey is deployed on multiple channels. We're pushing it through marketing. It's on the LinkedIn, and I'm trying to collect 1,000 respondents, and then I will quantify the degree of burnout, and then I will compare it to what the lean done for the healthcare, for the human healthcare, and propose that as a potential methodology. We actually are then trying to apply it in my new product, but that's a little bit later. The purpose of this is the dissertation and the quantification of the degree of this problem. So, Shawn, thank you for letting me speak up.
Well, and I'll just offer this up right now. So the Bridge Club is about 25,000 members strong. So the idea is that I am a great asset for that. So let's definitely connect. I'm happy to share that. We cover off on this topic a great deal from different avenues. It's very important that we have the conversation. In fact, right after all of this sequestering began, we immediately started having the conversation, because what was interesting, and we found, and I'm glad your study is also doing it, is it tends to be people look at compassion fatigue and all of that, and they look at it from just the perspective of those in the practice. But now the rest of the profession, for the first time, actually had an inkling as to what that actually meant, because they were put under new confines that changed their emotional balance. So for the first time, we're noting at the Bridge Club more and more people saying, I need to now attend that conversation that wouldn't have attended it before. And it is the industry practitioners coming in, because they too are facing their emotional balance.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
so it's
Well,
great to
thanks.
connect you guys. I'm glad we could do that. So this is unfortunate. We're out of time. It always happens every week. But I've got a couple questions that I'd love to ask you, Catherine, before we wrap
Yep.
up. So you're an inspiring person to me. The minute I met you, I felt like that. So what's something that you would share with our listeners that has inspired you, whether it's a TED Talk, a speaker, anything that you've got in your repertoire that you think our listeners should check out?
So I can guarantee no one has given you this one because I live in Chicago, and every year we host Chicago Ideas Week. So it may be a new concept for a lot of people listening to this. And I was very fortunate several years ago to attend the Chicago Ideas Week with Bonnie Curtis. And the video is available online. I actually sent it to your folks as well so they can make it available. There was an entire segment that was done on I work like a, and it was an underline for people to insert. There was an MMA fighter, there was a journalist, there was a philosopher, there were all these people, but it was all done in a short time frame. Bonnie Curtis actually is one of the producers on Schindler's List. And she tells a story of what it means to be a leader. She talks very definedly about when you're in the midst of struggle, when you can't solve something, how to solve it. And it really, first of all, her story is phenomenal because she talks very much about Steven Spielberg, and they had to go to him to get the answer. And he solved something, their biggest challenge, within 30 seconds, or maybe it was a minute and a half. But the idea of her advice being, always get someone smarter than you in the room. And so her entire story and leadership of what she's done in that entire segment of I work like a underline is powerful. And I highly encourage people to watch it because I think sometimes we forget the challenges we face an MMA fighter has faced or a philosopher has faced, and it can really give you insight into where to go.
That's amazing. And that's why Shawn invited me here, because he needed someone smarter than he is on the podcast. So that's just the story behind that. The second question that we asked Catherine is, who do you think we should also invite to the podcast? Do you know any people that would inspire our listeners, and who's that person?
One of the greatest people that I would also recommend to potentially have on would be Audrey Whitresh. And so Audrey is the founder of Zippy Vet, but then now she is the founder of Vet. She's also one of the founding members of the VVCA. She is wickedly smart. She is one of the foremost authorities on telemedicine because she has been herself practicing it for over 30 years in various forms. So she is one of the coolest cowboy hat wearing veterinarians you will ever meet in your life. And she has got more energy and insight. And I have to say, honestly, she's a mentor to me. She has spent time at conferences to sit down with me and give me guidance. She always has time for people, and I just absolutely adore her. So I would encourage you to have her on.
Thank you so much for listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. If you want to hear about our new episodes, please follow us on any social media channel. Also, you can check out our website at veterinarynnovationpodcast.com. See you next week.